One of the most important parts of a go-to-market strategy is defining your channel strategy. So channel strategy revolves around your distribution channels, which is where and how you deliver value to your customers with your products or services. Now, that channel strategy is the model or method that you use to establish what's the best place to deliver value to your customers. So it answers questions around how your product is purchased, where it's purchased, and where people go to learn about your product. Now, the activities and processes that are required to actually move your product from the producer, which is you, to your customer, are all related to your distribution channels. It also can include things that are considered intermediaries in that process, and we'll talk a little bit about what those intermediaries are. Now, remember, the purpose of your channel is to do 4 things. It's to educate your customers, enable purchasing for your customers, deliver value, and also provide your service. Now, some of the variables that come into place when you have to decide what's the best channel strategy for you is, one, how many customer segments are you solving? Maybe you only have one and you can choose one specific channel to focus on, or maybe you have a variety of customer segments and you need different ways to interact with them. Also, the investment required. Channel strategy is probably the most cost-intensive of all of the different pieces of your go-to-market strategy. So you want to think about how much money do you have on hand and what can you afford out the gate. You also have to think about whether the product is a standard product or something that requires a little bit more guidance and persuasion when trying to offer it to customers. So maybe you might need a salesperson versus having a retail space. You also want to think about the amount of control that you want in distributing the product and what your relationship is with the intermediaries in the process. So let's take a look at some channel types. Now, channel types, as you can see on the far left, are on 2 different vectors. So you have indirect or direct channel partners, and these are either direct, meaning interacting directly with the customer, or indirect, meaning that the customer has to go through some type of intermediary to get to your product or service. And then you have partner versus owned. Partner being a partner organization that's helping you facilitate that interaction with your customer, or owned meaning that you own the channel that your customers are interfacing with. Now, channel phases, also known as the buyer journey, are the different steps that the customer takes from first realizing they have a problem and starting to seek a solution, through actually finding a solution and making a purchase, and then after the fact, their experience with servicing and then ultimately retiring that product or service. Now, when we think about our channel strategy, we have to also think about what type of intermediary structure do we want set in place to kind of facilitate that interaction with the customer. Direct channels, as you can see here with banks, online stores, or the gas station, is when I can go directly as a customer to the service provider and interact with them directly. Now, agents is where we start to get into intermediaries. So this is the indirect channels. Now, agents kind of act as representatives on behalf of the business. They do the negotiations, they work on the marketing, and they really act as if the organization is almost an own channel, even though they're acting on behalf of the distributor. Now, distributors are ones that take the product from a particular service provider, and then they distribute it to wholesalers and retailers on their behalf. And so they're doing a lot of the logistics. So Amazon is a great example of a distributor. Now, wholesalers and retailers kind of take it to the next level. Wholesalers usually buy their products from distributors and then resell it. So they're buying it at a wholesaler rate so that they can then resell it at a profit. And so Costco is a great example of this. And then retailers usually get their products and services from wholesalers or directly from the company, and they sell it in their branded stores. When thinking about how you want to structure your channel strategy, there are 3 different distribution strategies you might want to consider. The first is intensive distribution. So this is where you're flooding the market and meeting your customer wherever they could possibly be with your product or service. So that's like getting your product in every single store, putting it on every single website, and making it accessible on your own website. Then you have selective distribution. So maybe you're choosing a few key retail partners, maybe you're choosing like a Walmart or a Target, but not any smaller boutiques, and you're making key decisions about where you want your product to be found. Now, this might be influenced by what you want your product or service to be perceived as. Do you want it to be perceived as super accessible? Do you want it to be perceived as a high-end product? That might go into choosing how you're selectively distributing. And then the last is exclusive distribution. This is where you want tight control on who is actually facilitating the sale of your product or service. So maybe there's only one way that your product can be sold or from one storefront. And this gives you a higher level of control, but it can also be a lot more cost intensive. Because now, instead of being able to utilize other channels, you may have to pay for a key partnership to have it in one exclusive store, or you may be paying a lot to maintain the operations of doing the distribution yourself. So things to think about when you're defining your channel strategy.